The way we think about the world and ourselves influences the way we feel. When we accept negative messages in our environment, or when we criticize ourselves, this triggers negative emotions. In this exercise, we are going to look at some common ways of distorted thinking and some techniques about thinking more realistically about the situation. Emotions and cognitive vulnerability. Cognitive distortions are unrealistic perceptions and interpretations of what is happening around us or inside us. In the first part, we will look at 3 types of cognitive distortions. After examining them, in the second part of this exercise, we want you to think of a recent situation where you felt overwhelming emotions. Part 1. Number 1. All or nothing thinking. All or nothing thinking involves seeing things in only extreme categories. For example, after a small setback, saying to yourself, "I am a bad mother," or "I will never amount to anything." Derogatory names and labels are part of this cognitive distortion. They are not helpful. Number 2, maximization or minimization. Maximization refers to taking the negative aspect of a certain situation and catastrophizing it or blowing it out of proportion. Notice that this is not meant to undermine the situation or your feelings about it, but to simply help you be more realistic about the severity of the problem. The optimal option would be to see the situation as it is, not more or less. For example, if you think, "I was so socially anxious at work, I was sweating nonstop, and I'm sure that my boss thinks I'm weird," then you are probably maximizing this aspect of the situation. On the other hand, minimization is the opposite case. It refers to diminishing something positive from a certain situation. For example, "I know that they promoted me at work, but my colleagues will still never value my work." Number 3, overgeneralization. This is another very common way of distorted thinking. Overgeneralization is the assumption that if something bad happened once, then it will happen again and again. For example, you had a fight with your girlfriend and you assume that this will be happening again and again until you eventually break up, although there is no real proof of this. Over time, you will get more effective in observing your distorted way of thinking and doing something about that. Remember, practice will take you a long way. Part 2. Now that you got familiarized with these 3 forms of distorted thinking, think of a recent situation where you experienced overwhelming emotion. Try to remember the situation and what happened. Think about what your train of thought was before and during the situation. Take your time. Take the worksheet and write down the thoughts you had. Then, try to identify which of the cognitive distortions you unconsciously used in your thinking. In the last column, write down a rational, objective response to the distortion you identified. What would you say to yourself? Look at the facts of the situation. It can be helpful to try to think how you would talk to a friend if they were thinking like you were. Now, pause the video and fill in the table. Great job! How do you feel? Do you feel any different than before? Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next exercise from this module.